I'll preface my presentation here with the fact that I could probably stand up here and talk to you for an hour and a half. However, I'm not allowed to do that. So I'm going to try and cut it down. Questions at the end, of course, but this can get a little bit tricky, so just bear with me. If you have any questions, I'm available. I've got business cards and contact information. So moving along, let's talk a little bit about active radiation shielding for man's interplanetary spaceflight, shall we? So my problem statement, radiation in environments outside of the Earth's magnetosphere and atmosphere is deadly to astronauts and equipment and is a constant and ongoing problem. Crews traveling in space experience potentially deadly doses of radiation, both electromagnetic and ionized. In addition to this, space radiation can also damage sensitive electronics and can cause damage to the human body, such as cataracts, cancer, and direct damage to cells and DNA. So naturally, had to contact some experts. I got into email contact with 3 professors from MIT who responded with some great testimonial. Dr. Jeffrey Allen Hoffman, Dr. Olivier Elbouet, and Dr. Daniel Lee Hastings all teach aeronautics and astronautics there. We'll learn a little bit more about Jeffrey Allen Hoffman. He's got a pretty cool background. I also got into contact with a former student of Mr. Bush who now works at Gloria Taylor Labs, Dr. Eric Jacob, who led me to one of his friends who's currently working on his doctorate, just needs to write his dissertation. Interestingly enough, he's actually doing his PhD and did his master research on this subject, so he was a great resource to have and currently works at NASA Ames as an intern. So a little bit more about Dr. Hoffman. Turns out he's a former astronaut and spent over 50 days in space. He gave me a great quote when I contacted him by email. Radiation is probably the most serious obstacle to long-duration space flights outside the Earth's protected magnetic field. So as Mr. Bush always said, you gotta find your army, and well, there it is. Astronauts agree that they don't want cancer. So, what even is space radiation? It just sounds like radiation in space, but it's a little bit different. Here on Earth, we have mainly electromagnetic radiation, whereas in space, there are 3 different types. Electromagnetic, as I said, this includes X-rays and gamma rays. You also have solar proton or particle events, which are coronal mass injections. They come from our sun. And then you have galactic cosmic rays, which sound the most science fiction-y of all. They come from extrasolar sources, extragalactic, and are mainly found in interplanetary space. They consist of atomic nuclei that have been accelerated by supernovae or exploding stars to the point where their electrons are stripped off and they're now fast-moving. An iron atom accelerated to a 1 giga-electron volt per nucleon potential will be moving about 590 million miles per hour. That's pretty fast. May not be very heavy, but comparable to its mass, it has a vast amount of momentum and can cause tremendous damage. This is what makes them dangerous, is the fact that they're moving so fast, and they basically tear into your cells like a fragmentation grenade. NASA currently limits our exposure to this radiation to 3% fatal cancer risk at a 95% confidence interval, which roughly equates to 0.62 sieverts for a 30-year-old male. Sieverts are a unit of radiation dosage that we look into. Little factoid, the Curiosity rover, so the probe we sent to Mars, actually absorbed 0.5 sieverts over its 250-day, 3-day transit journey to Mars, which means that if we were to send a round magnetostatic shielding, same concept but with magnets, but with traditional magnetostatic shielding shown here, you have very strong magnetic field with crew module that are basically deadly, almost as deadly as the radiation itself. Then there's a interesting looking idea called unbound magnetic shielding, which you'll find out a little bit on because it pertains to my project, which utilizes two concentric coplanar solenoids centered around a toroidal habitable volume. So think of a donut. And the neat thing about this is that the magnetic field would hypothetically cancel due to the right-hand curl rule. We'll learn why that doesn't work in a bit. In terms of passive shielding, a couple ideas that have been thrown forward are RxF1 plastic, which is a high polyethylene, high purity polyethylene, which has a high hydrogen content. Liquid or solid hydrogen shielding has been brought up along with plasma rocket engines as a fuel, but as soon as your fuel runs out, then you're kind of out of luck because eventually there's your shielding. And then an interesting one, fecal matter shielding. An organization called Mars One, which looks to send people to Mars outside of any government-run space agency, hypothesizes that they can use astronaut waste matter stored in bags that previously held water as a shield. I don't quite agree with that because you have no way of determining the ion track as it rockets through, and then you can still get hit by secondary radiation. So a couple of design objectives that I set forth. I wanted my shielding to be net positive, so no secondary radiation whatsoever. It needs to be durable, obviously, since space is one of the most hostile environments anywhere. It needs to shield a 2-year or more mission, similar to that, which would be a round trip to Mars with maybe a planet touchdown. That's debatable. It needs to consume a limited amount of power, obviously, because we can't be dragging up a bunch of nuclear reactors into space, although take one as you'll find out. It needs to have minimal electric or magnetic interference inside the habitation module so as to protect the crew, and then it needs to be lightweight. Below 130,000 kilograms was the benchmark I set. Have a pretty cool tie that has the Space Launch System. That's the target vehicle I set for the mission. So that's its payload mass. So I talked about the unbound magnetic shielding, and we'll get into why the traditional system doesn't work. This is a field density plot. From blue to bright pink details the scale of the strength of the magnetic field. And right here, these circles represent the two solenoids. This was done in a program called Finite Element Method Magnetics. If you're interested in magnetic simulation, I would recommend checking it out because it's free and it's very nice. And then this circle here is my representation of the habitation module. I'll say this once. I am not in the business of designing the habitation module. I'm merely designing something to shield it. This has a diameter of 4 meters, which is kind of standard based on the International Space Station, so I figured the astronauts can float around in there fairly happily. I'm more focused on what goes on outside. So as you can see, contrary to the right-hand curl rule, which states that you have, with this system, if you're running current in this direction, you have a magnetic field running clockwise about these solenoids. So since this is a vector, one would think that you would get perfect cancellation along the center. But as you can see, you really don't. If we look at a graph of the magnetic field along the vertical axis, we see that it's perfectly symmetrical and has great cancellation effects. That's all fine and dandy, but when we look at the horizontal axis, not so much. You actually have kind of a plateau from a length of 1 meter to a length of 5 meters where the habitation module resides. So, not very good. You don't want that. In comes idea generation. May seem like kind of a dumb idea, but one of the first things I thought of was, why not just add more solenoids? Because you can boost the field strength, maybe lower the required current. First thing I